Here's what Dan Harmon, co-creator of Rick and Morty, had to say about the show's episode 304, Vindicators 3: Return of World Ender.
Go finish editing episode 304. It's the worst. It's my fault. It's going to be the worst episode of Rick and Morty ever.
So why does he think so negatively about this episode? I don't agree with his evaluation that it was the worst episode ever, but I do agree that it didn't reach the typical lofty standards of the show. I think the reason why Dan Harmon views this episode so negatively is that it doesn't follow his golden rule of storytelling, the hero's journey. Dan Harmon is a fervent believer in the narrative structure of the hero's journey, and has discussed its importance to his writing on numerous occasions. The hero's journey is a pattern of narrative and describes the basic structure of many stories. Its steps are as follows. The character is in a zone of comfort, but they want something. They enter an unfamiliar situation, they adapt to it. They get what they want, pay a heavy price for it, then return to their familiar situation, having changed. Harmon gives an example of how the hero's journey plays out in the episode Morty Night Run from season 2.
Morty's circle is that he exists in comfort until he finds out that Rick is an arms dealer. This is an ethical quandary for Morty that makes him go across a threshold and search for a way to undo the ethical damage that he perceives Rick is doing. So that's why he takes Rick's car keys, and then he goes and accidentally kills the assassin, but saves Fart. The second half of the story, we start finding out that the act of saving that life is gonna cost a lot of other people their lives.
How do you feel about all these people that are getting killed today because of your choices? I did the right thing, Rick!
We cross a return threshold, getting Fart to his portal, at which point Morty realizes that saving Fart's life is gonna cost all carbon-based life. So Morty makes the decision to change into someone who's willing to kill.
So let's compare that with how the hero's journey plays out in the Vindicators episode. Morty's in a familiar situation, helping Rick with the project. He drags Rick to the Vindicators because he looks up to them. Rick and the Vindicators fight. Morty is caught in the middle. He finds himself on a mission with the Vindicators and Rick, unhappily guides them through Rick's drunken saw-like trials. They escape and return to the surface. Morty changes to become a person that doesn't believe in real heroes.
Everyone in the universe is a hero, Mom!
The first major problem that the Vindicators episode has relating to the hero's journey is that Morty changes far too early in the episode, around stage 6, not 8. As Rick and Morty disarm the neutrino bomb in Rick's basketball trial, Morty tells Rick that he has
managed to destroy just about everything today. The villains, the heroes, the lines between them.
Rick has already made Morty completely disillusioned with the Vindicators, but there's still 1/3 of the episode left. With Morty's character arc complete, Morty has no real agenda, and just goes along for the ride. Additionally, as viewers we see the change in the Vindicators even earlier than this. In Morty Night Run, we find out that Fart is bad at the very end of the episode, while we figure out the Vindicators are flawed halfway through.
You're the learning disabled kid we do photo ops with!
Their transition into the antagonists is predictable. The second problem with Morty's change in this episode is that he is forced to change. His change of heart isn't his own decision. None of Morty's actions lead him to conclude that there aren't any heroes. Rick's plan to reveal the Vindicators' flaws works, and it is quickly made obvious that they aren't heroes. So Morty has no choice but to agree with Rick and say that they suck. Additionally, because we never see the Vindicators do anything heroic, and are only told of their heroism, when it's revealed that they're not that heroic, it doesn't come as a great shock to us. Show, don't tell is an old adage about storytelling that holds true here. They've done nothing to prove to the audience that Rick might be wrong, and that they are actually heroic. We all know Rick is the smartest man in the universe, so when he says that the Vindicators are writers of their own press releases, we believe him. The Vindicators' change is then completely expected. It would have been more surprising if the Vindicators ended up being good guys, forcing a change of perspective from Rick. Morty doesn't come to this realization that he was wrong and should change his worldview by himself. He was force-fed the truth by Rick from the beginning, which makes Morty's realization less satisfying and a bit unearned. The last major problem Vindicators 3 has is that Morty's change does nothing to resolve the conflict in the episode. For example, in Morty Night Run, Morty realizes that he was wrong, and then takes the action of killing Fart to admit that he was wrong, completing his character arc and resolving the conflict of the episode. However, in Vindicators 3, we are simply told of Morty's change of heart, and that he doesn't believe in heroes anymore. But nothing really comes of it. It has no effect on the plot. They complete Rick's final trial because Morty simply happens to be the same weight as Noob Noob, and they survive Supernova choking them because it turns out that Rick randomly planned a party. The resolution of the episode feels unearned and unfulfilling. Because Dan Harmon cares so much about story structure, he has some good reasons to view Vindicators 3 so negatively. Morty's change comes too early, is forced upon him, doesn't affect the plot in any way, and in doing so, violates the hero's journey. Now, if you really loved this episode, that's great. Really. I don't think this is a terrible episode. Art, stories, and comedy are subjective. Some people enjoy an atypically structured story. I just don't think Dan Harmon does. Thanks for watching, and subscribe if you want more videos like this.